Go.
Welcome everyone to the Laconia Technical Services section, Managing Metadata. My name is Rebecca Bartlett. I'm going to be introducing the Planning Committee of Laconia Technical Services, and then I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca Fenning to introduce our speakers. My name is Rebecca Bartlett. Again, I work at the LaGrange Public Library. I'm the Access Services Manager, and I'm the current president of Laconia Technical Services. With us today, we have Rebecca Fenning, who is the Vice President, President-elect of Laconia Technical Services. We also have Laura Murph, who is with the Lisle Library District, and she's our secretary. Linda Ling is not with us today. She is our treasurer. We also have Joy Anhalt, who is our past president. And then I'll share the list of our board representatives. Not everyone is here today. Amy Weiss of Woodridge, Sarah Ferger of Joliet, Nancy George of Rails, Mary Kelly Marquez of Warrenville, and Michelle Sandstrom of Naperville Public Library. I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Rebecca Fenning to introduce our speakers.
Thanks, Rebecca. Good morning, everyone. I am going to introduce our speakers and quickly go over our agenda. So we have three wonderful speakers with us today. We have Tyler Wertz from the Evanston Public Library, Elliot Williams of the University of Texas, and Mike Monaco from the University of Akron. And Tyler and Elliot will be speaking to us about OpenRefine, and Mike will be sharing with us about MarcEdit. So Laura, and also Laura, I'm so sorry. Sorry, Laura. And Laura is going to give us a quick disclaimer about some SQL stuff. So we'll start with Laura, and then we'll jump right into OpenRefine. We'll do questions after, so feel free to keep throwing them in the Q&A. And then we'll take a little bit of a break, a 10 to 15 minute break, and then we'll jump back in, right back in with MarcEdit, and then we'll close with some more questions. So I will hand it over to Laura.
Hi, I am here to explain why we cannot teach you SQL. It gets requested a lot, and I absolutely understand. But there's a few things about SQL that make it almost impossible to teach unless we know what domain you're working in and what your tables are. Because SQL is a domain-specific language, which means depending on what hardware and software you're using, depends on the specific language that you can use in it. And it gets changed just a little bit. So like if you're in the Microsoft or Adobe, they have different small differences in their language. There is a main language, about 900, little over 900 words that have very specific meanings across all SQL sub-languages. And those you can learn, and those are the ones that you see like the join, the whereas, those types of things are consistent across, but because those terms don't mean anything unless you know what table you're using, it's not very beneficial to learn how to use those statements to code in SQL if you can't actually write one to use in front of you. For example, I can write SQL for my ILS, Polaris. Polaris uses a transactional SQL language that Microsoft wrote, added little subgroups to. Now, just because I know transactional SQL does not mean that I can write a SQL code for anybody, because ours is on Azure. So that's what I can write for, is the Microsoft. And the tables that Polaris uses, the naming scheme that they use is different depending on who you have. So even between Sierra and Polaris, they're owned by the same company. Even between those two services, the tables are completely different. And I wouldn't be able to just hop into a Sierra and write SQL query that will bring me anything useful if all I'm using is the information I have from Polaris, which is what I learned it for. That's why a lot of times when SQL classes come around, it is tailored specifically to one type. And that's because everybody needs to have access to the same one. And so much of SQL really is just telling where to find the information. It's saying use table A to match up with table C, to match up with table F, to bring back the information for B. And if you don't know the specific terms that are used for all of those different tables and how they can connect, then writing a SQL code isn't going to bring anything back. It's very complicated. It is super awesome. I mean, it's querying. Who doesn't want to use data? And it's all there. You can access more data through SQL than you can through any reporting system you have. But unfortunately, it's not something that can be taught generally unless you have specific access to what you are going to want to work with. Otherwise, it's completely theoretical. And it's hard to it's hard to learn a practical skill theoretically. And that's really where you get into the problem with learning SQL. So that's my disclaimer, kind of why we can't do it for you. I do highly recommend, if you get a chance, an opportunity to, and if you are going to pursue SQL, I would recommend speaking to your IT person, finding out the tables, the transactions that you're looking to have access to. And that will help you be able to build it. I will also say that we have wonderful colleagues, and crowdsourcing code is awesome. If you've thought of it, somebody's written it. And if you can find the person and find that information and you know how to read it, then you can still use that code. You can still do SQL queries without knowing exactly how to write one, as long as you know where to find it. And I can tell you with III, with Innovative, they have a whole, I actually had to join Discord, 50-year-old that joined Discord to get SQL code from my ILS. And it's a wonderful source, and I've yet to have to necessarily write anything just for me. I can sub little changes here and there that I need, but taking it from somebody else's already built code for Polaris and then me just changing things makes all the difference. So if you are interested in SQL, that's what I would recommend. And it really is best to learn it hands-on. I tried many, many times to learn it from a book or without having all of the necessary information, and it just doesn't work, unfortunately. So yeah, that's my disclaimer. It's a little information about that, because we did want to do SQL with this group because it would be beneficial, but we just weren't able to due to all the varying points. It's a controlled language with no actual control installed to make sure that the language is kept unified, because it is handled by NISO. It's supposed to be regulated, but there's so many variables that are allowed in there. There's sub-languages that make it difficult to easily transfer from one to the other. All right, I think that's all I got to say. I'm going to hand it off to the fun stuff, because I am super excited about OpenRefine, and I am in love with Terry Reese and MarcEdit. So I'm super excited for what's coming forward. And that's me. I'm going to mute myself and I think send it back over to Rebecca.
Thanks, Laura. And I'm just going to immediately hand it over to Elliot and Tyler. So take it away, gentlemen.
Hey everyone, my name is Tyler. I am the Data and Technology Librarian at the Evanston Public Library, where part of my role is kind of doing some like data analysis and prepping data and doing things with that. So as part of that, I've come to use OpenRefine, and with me today, I have my co-presenter.
Hey everyone, thanks Tyler. I'm Elliot Williams. I'm the metadata strategist at the University of Texas at San Antonio. So I do kind of varying metadata work across all of our resources. So working with MarcEdit, working with digital collections data, working with other kinds of metadata that we have going on. And I'm excited to be here with y'all today.
Today we're going to start off. Ellie and I are going to kind of go through how you can get what is OpenRefine, how you can get started with OpenRefine, and also give you some practical examples. I am not a cataloger, nor have I ever been a cataloger. So I'm going to kind of be approaching it from like more of a data analysis side, but I think a lot of the things I'll highlight, you can use in different ways. It can be applicable. I think with the amount of time that we have today, I think we're going to be moving kind of quickly through some of our examples. So I wouldn't say don't stress too much about, getting every detail we're going to go over. Just kind of, we really just want to highlight what is possible with OpenRefine. And so just kind of, just be open to, seeing what is possible and how you can apply it to your own library. So to get started, so what is OpenRefine? Oops. It is essentially it's a free open source tool for cleaning and transforming data. So it is very specific to like just, basically wrangling data. It really doesn't do anything beyond that, but it is really good at doing exactly that, about cleaning data and makes that process very quick. So I'm sure many of you have ever worked on a data project. Oftentimes one of the hardest or longest part is the data cleaning process. In the past, I've always kind of used Excel or Google Sheets to kind of do that thing, and it makes it really tedious. When I started OpenRefine, it really sped up what I can do with it. So how does it do those things? How does it clean and transform your data? One of the key parts of it is what they call faceting or filtering. And it has some really powerful ways of how you can slice and dice your data to either just clean it or get it down to like just what you need for whatever project you're doing. It also has a feature called clustering. It's a built-in tool. And what clustering is, it has algorithms that are kind of like baked into the software that can be used for kind of clumping your data and then finding like typos or errors. It is really powerful. That's something, spreadsheets can't do effectively. And then it also has some transforming capabilities too. It uses something called what they GREL for short, which is a general refine, oh my God, I'm totally blinking, expression language. And you can write these expressions that kind of manipulate your data within it to, either do like custom faceting or even like changing your data inside the table itself. And you kind of write these expressions out. It's kind of similar to Excel functions to kind of get it back to that, but it works much quicker. And Elliot will be talking about later is reconciling. So you can connect your data source, your data sets to outside data sets to kind of reconcile with them to, again, kind of catch errors within your own data. So, some of as we go through these projects, you might notice some things like, oh, I can do that in Excel, or I can do that in whatever your favorite spreadsheet software is. So why would you use OpenRefine like over that? And so these are the ones that really stand out to me. Why I like it and prefer it. One is unique features, kind of the clustering, the faceting kind of we talked about, and there's some other things we'll highlight today that are OpenRefine has that a spreadsheet doesn't have. Second, it's faster. When you're working with small data sets, it's not that big of a deal, in a spreadsheet software. When you start getting 50,000 rows, 100,000 rows or more, applying, functions or just filtering data, it gets really slow and bogged down. But OpenRefine, it can, just crank through your data tables very quickly. And then I also think it's a little more visual and intuitive, especially when it comes to like filtering and how it manipulates data and how it transforms data. So I really appreciate that over different spreadsheets. And there's also a limited undos. So, you know, what we'll highlight to this day as well is that every transformation you do to your data set, it tracks it. And then not only does it track it within like the session that you're in, but if you close your project and come back to a month later, every single transformation, you can go back to any point that you transformed that data. And second is repeatability. This is a really cool feature within OpenRefine, is that especially if you're working with data sets that are different but similar, like every month or something like that, you process a report that you have to clean, you can really fine tune every cleaning step that you have. And then you can export those steps and then just apply it to a data set. So that's a very brief kind of intro to what OpenRefine is and some of the key features. So next we're going to kind of show you, just how you get started with it. If you go to openrefine.org, on the downloads page, you're going to see, it's a free, as I mentioned before, it's a free open source product. You can download it. I typically download it with the include Java whenever I update, just so it needs that to run. And then that will give you a zip file. And has everybody seen my file directory? I just want to make sure I'm not sharing just Chrome.
We're just seeing seeing your browser.
Right, my bad. I forgot to share. Okay, how about now? Okay, perfect. So yeah, once you download, you're going to get a zip file, and then all you gotta do is extract that file, and then you'll get a copy of it, and you just basically save that file wherever you want, and then you just open it up, and then you're going to see this kind of blue little diamond thing, and that is the program. You launch that, and you're going to notice something. Okay. OpenRefine works differently than kind of other applications that you might have. I don't know why this is not. Okay, there it goes. Normally it's not that slow. What OpenRefine does, it essentially turns your computer, your machine that you're on, into a local web server, and an OpenRefine will then launch in your web browser, and this is where you interact with it. So while it is like in your web browser, you are not online. I just want to kind of reiterate that everything you're doing is local. So any file that you work with, any project that you save is going to be saved locally to your own machine. So you're not necessarily exposing your data to any sort of security. You're not uploading your files to the cloud for processing. Everything is handled on your computer, so you don't need to worry about that. And then you can then just start from here, create projects. If you have projects that you've been working on, you can open it. You can import OpenRefine projects if you're sharing that between coworkers, or you can just kind of import. Most likely, I imagine most of us are probably just going to import a CSV file or an Excel file. It gives you all the different file types that you can use. If you are a Google Enterprise Library like myself, you can also import Google Sheets, or you can sign into your Google account to pull in data that way as well. And so I'm going to give an example. So this is the example data set that we had. You can select your file and then hit upload it, and you'll get started inside this what they call like the parsing options for kind of importing your data to start your project. I purposely kind of left this a little messy, just to kind of show you some of the options. You can see them down here, like what you can do and how you want it to interpret it. Mostly, I don't really change anything when I create a project. But in this case, you can see I have some lines that I don't want. The column names aren't populating properly. So I'm going to ignore the first 5. And then you can see I had this parse next one line as a column headers, which automatically did that for me. One thing I often do is, I trim the leading and trailing white space just to kind of clean that up a little bit. And the other thing that you might do is attempt to, if you have numerical data, you can attempt to parse it into numbers, but I'm not going to do that. And then from there, you can just click here, create project. And then you can go from there. So I'm going to turn it over to Elliot, and Elliot's going to kind of go over some of like the basic interface options for OpenRefine.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. Let me start sharing. Is everybody seeing my OpenRefine window?
Yes.
Perfect, cool, thanks. So this is a different project than the one Tyler just created. This is the other sort of sample data set that we provided y'all to play around with this data. It's an excerpt of some digital collections metadata from my library. As I said, that's a lot of what I work with. So I'm going to run through some kind of the basic operations of OpenRefine that you'll probably find yourself using pretty often. So when you look at it, it looks, pretty much like a spreadsheet. You have your columns and you have your rows and data in the cells there. And so one of the things I wanted to highlight that Tyler mentioned already is the undo redo menu, which you'll see right here. So as Tyler said, OpenRefine keeps track of every action you take and makes it really easy to kind of go back and forth. So you can see here everything I have done in this project since I created it. So and it shows, it kind of gives you a nice little name of what that is. And you can go back and forth just by clicking in this. So if I wanted to undo these last kind of 5 things, I would just click here and it undoes those changes. And then if I want to step back to where I was before, I just click back down here. So it's really easy. As long as you don't take any more actions, you can just sort of move back and forth as much as you want to. So this is a really handy way to test things out and see how they work. However, I do want to note, like if you move back in your action history and then you take some more actions, it will sort of overwrite these things down here. So once you take some more actions, you can't redo these previous actions. That's just something to be aware of. And it does, as Tyler said, it's infinite. It saves everything you've ever done. So I could go all the way back to when I created this project, and it would be exactly the way it was when I created it. And then I could step back any place in here. I see a question in the Q&A about, can you search for an action? And yes, you can. So there's the filter here. So if I wanted to see all actions I'd taken on, for example, the title column, you can filter to just those, which is really handy. The other thing that's in this menu that Tyler again also mentioned earlier is the ability to apply actions that you've taken on other projects. And so that's in these extract and apply buttons up here. Basically, this lets you copy and paste actions that you've taken from one project into another project. So if you click on extract here, this is that same operation history that you see there, and you can select certain actions. So let's say I've done a lot of renaming columns. So let's say I wanted to be able to rename these columns in another project. Like Tyler was saying, say I export the same data every month and I wanted to always rename these columns. So I would select those, and then you can just copy this. This is the actions formatted as JSON data. You can just copy it, and then you would go into a new project, import your data, and then you go to this apply here and you paste in that JSON history, and it will do those same actions. So this is really handy. I use this a lot. I have I often am extracting data from this same digital repository, and I want to do some kind of basic cleanup before I really dig into it. So I have a file saved on my computer that just has all that data set, that operation history. So whenever I create a new project, I just paste that in and I'm ready to go. So that's really handy. So the next thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is OpenRefine has 2 modes you can use for viewing your data. So it has rows view and records view, which you can see up here above your data. So right now we're in rows mode. And so you can see that each line of the data is alternating colors between gray and white. and each row is numbered individually. And so in this mode, OpenRefine treats each row of data separately, kind of unrelated to any of the other rows. If we switch into records mode, you can see that the color coding and the numbering changes. So it's grouping the first, I think, 11 rows here into a single record, and then the next 5 rows here are another record. And so what it's doing is it's grouping those rows based on the values in the first column of the data, which with this data here is this record identifier column. So it assumes that if there's a value in that first column, it's the start of a new record. And any rows following that don't have a value there are part of that same record. And then when it finds a new value, it creates a new record. And so it's sort of treating those as all part of one thing, one grouping that together. Because it always uses this first column here to create records, it's often helpful to have that as sort of a unique identifier. Because this is sort of an OAI PMH metadata export. I use this record identifier. If it was MARC data, it might be like a system identifier, like an 001 field or something like that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about faceting in a minute, which is when the rows and records distinction becomes really important. So if this doesn't quite make sense to you, it took me a long time to kind of really wrap my mind around the rows versus records thing. But hopefully when we look at facets, it will make a little bit more sense. So as Tyler said, I think one of the most powerful parts of OpenRefine is the faceting. They make it really easy to explore your data, to see what values are in each column, and to select down to just the data that you're interested in. And honestly, they're the thing I use the most in OpenRefine. Often I'm not actually editing the data, I'm just using the facets to kind of explore the data, get a sense of what's there. So any column in OpenRefine can be faceted, and there's a couple of different kinds of facets you can use. And the way to apply a facet is super easy. So you go to the little arrow here at the top of the column, which is where all of the sort of options for that column are going to be. So you go to the arrow, select facet. Often the type of facet I use the most is text facet. I bet that will probably be the same for you all, but there's lots of other options to explore as well, especially if you have numeric data in your project. So then you select facet and it creates this facet here on the side. So what this is showing is it's all of the values in that column and how many times they appear. So Bexar County, Texas appears 64 times. And if I want to see all of those times, I just click on it and it filters me down to 64 matching records. And it will always show you up in the top here how many records you have and how many there are total, which is helpful for getting a sense of like how much of the data set is this. You can also select multiple values at once. So if I wanted to see Bexar County and Duval County, for example, you would hit include here. And so now you see there's 69 matching records because it's 64 plus 5. The facets are also constantly updating, and you can have more than one going at once. So I have this location facet now, and I'm going to undo it. So you hit reset, which will just sort of remove those selections you have. And let's say I also wanted to see what the subjects were. So I'm going to create a text facet for the subject column as well. And then if I select Fort Davis, Texas, for example, now I'm seeing only the subjects that appear in records where the location is Fort Davis. So that's a really powerful way of sort of getting a sense of what values exist and how they interact with each other. So when you have a facet active, one thing that's important to note is that if you make any edits to the columns, so let's say I wanted to clear out all the titles for these records. So you would say, go to the title column, transform, and I'm just going to set the title to a blank string. So now there's no title for these records, but it only did that for these items that I have active. So if I remove this Fort Davis facet, now the other items still have their titles. So it was only applying that action to the records that I had active under that facet. And that's really powerful. It lets you kind of manipulate your data in really fine-grained ways. But I have also sometimes forgotten that I have a facet active and thought I applied something to every piece of data I had, and then been confused later when I realized that it hadn't made that change. So I'm going to undo that title thing real quick. So again, just going back to the undo redo menu, just going one step back, and now I have all my titles back. So I mentioned the facets are also where the rows versus records distinction becomes important. So right now, I'm going to apply that Fort Davis facet again. So right now we're seeing all of the subjects for all of the records that have Fort Davis in the location. But if I switch back to rows view, now you see our subject facet is much smaller. And that's because it's only including the first subject because it's treating each row separately. So in our records, only the first row has a location field. So even though there are more subjects, it's not including those in the facet because those don't have Fort Davis, so they're not included, if that makes sense. So you do want to think really carefully about, do I want all of the data in that record, or do I only want the ones that match in the exact same row? Again, as I said, this kind of took me a while to wrap my head around. So sometimes I think it helps to just sort of play around with facets and see what you're getting. But that's where the sort of rows versus records distinction becomes really important. One other thing I was going to mention about facets, OpenRefine makes it easy to sort of export the data from your facets. So if you click here where it says the number of choices in the facet, it opens up sort of a little window that just has the values and the number just as text. So you can really easily copy and paste this. And if you wanted to copy and paste that to Excel, to a Word document, to an email, whatever you wanted to do with it, I find that really helpful often for sort of documenting the state of things at a given time. As I said, the facets are always updating. So as you do more things in your data, the facet values may change, but you might want to have a record of what it was at a certain point. So I think that can be really useful. As I said, there's lots of other kinds of facets you can use as well. Another one I like is the text length facet. So if you go to facets, it's under customized facets here. And so that'll show you how long the values in that field are, which I often find is helpful for looking at, like, sometimes you do that on the title field and it's like, oh, there's a title that's 1,500 characters long. Like, well, that seems strange. Something weird is going on with that record. So it can be useful for identifying oddities like that. As I said, there's lots of other types of facets that are worth playing around with and help you sort of explore that data, as I said. So I think that's it for me for this point, and I'm going to hand it back to Tyler.
Tyler, you're on mute.
Zoom was hiding the unmute from me. Everybody seeing my screen again? Just going to confirm before.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I want to share, this is a real world project. Our collection development librarian asked me to kind of do an analysis of basically what titles are people putting on hold. And so I created eventually created this dashboard for her, and where you can kind of like limit down to, you know, what are popular titles, what are popular authors, and like, you know, where things are coming from. And then, but in order to do this, I really had to kind of clean up the data first to kind of get to it. So this kind of, the collection developer, she was specifically wanted to know adult fiction and nonfiction. So kind of where once I imported my data, I kind of started with looking at the collection and using a text facet to limit this down to so fiction and nonfiction. And I know I didn't really need the other information, and just to make it easier to work with later, I'm just going to delete everything else. So an easy way to do that is I'm going to invert my selection. Now I have everything that isn't adult fiction and nonfiction selected, and I'm going to go edit rows. I'm going to remove matching rows, and that just got rid of everything there. And then another thing, since I knew she wanted to kind of break down our statistical codes and like what was popular by like section, specifically like in the nonfiction section. And when I've worked with this data before, I often find errors and like the wrong statistical code being applied to something else, or we're also looking at materials from other libraries. So they might use a code that we don't use. So it's kind of useless information. So just as an example, I would probably spend a lot of time going through each one just to kind of make sure everything was right. I'm not going to do that today because that'd be super tedious. But I can see right here in my fiction, I have a 140s statistical code, and I know that's probably wrong. I can see it's here. It's a mystery. So I'm going to change this so you can click into a cell and edit directly as an option. I can click apply. I'm going to reset that. Another one I noticed that I was prepping, so it's crime. So crime is not a statistical code that we use at my library, so it's kind of useless information. To kind of clean this up and bring it in line with what we use. Most of these are probably mysteries as well. So I'm going to click edit. I'm going to type mystery. And this is a really cool function, especially when you're trying to make a mass change to something like this. Instead of clicking just apply, which will apply to this one cell, I can click all identical cells. And that just edited all of them. And then because crime, there's nothing labeled crime anymore, that one just goes away. So again, I probably go through, fiction and nonfiction, and then kind of find like the outliers. As Elliot says, is really great for exploring your data, finding those outliers, and then and then cleaning up things like that. The next step is, since we are looking at titles and authors, we want to know specifically what titles are really popular and what authors are really popular. In order to kind of aggregate this information on these two fields, we need to make sure there's no typos. And again, this is something that I often come up against. So I'm going to use the clustering feature to find those typos, something I mentioned in my intro. So I'm going to click edit cells, do the titles first, cluster and edit. And what this is doing is applying some of these algorithms. And do not ask me to explain what these specifically are. I don't know. I just know that they work. So they typically I only use key function fingerprint, the default. I've tried using other ones. Usually they give me a bunch of false positives, and it's just kind of useless for me. And I just noticed something, what kind of Elliot mentioned, when you have a filter on or a facet on, and you start working on something, you don't realize it, and you're not getting everything. So I was totally just demoing a mistake, not an actual mistake. So I'm going to cluster and edit again. And okay, now I'm getting fiction and nonfiction titles. And what you can do is you can edit directly in the field, or you can just select here, so there's an extra period. I'm just going to click Red Rising. Yeah, this one's fine. So there's no space there. Let's bring that back in. Yeah, that's fine. So here's a different one. So I know it's the same title, and I know with travel books, they often have the same title, but they might be published in a different year. So if you have a question about what it is, you can click browse this cluster, and it will open up another window, and it will show you just what it is. And then you can see here, I'm getting two different years. In this situation, I'll probably just combine them, but I could leave them separately if I wanted to. But that's just a way to kind of double check, make sure it is. This has got the accent mark. Go with that one. Let's do that one. And I'm going to say merge and recluster. And then, oops, I forgot to do that one. Merge and recluster. And then nothing else was fine. Just kind of give you an idea. So this is, if you use a different one, you can see it's what it is applying. It's finding things with similar names, but you can see these all have different names. So I typically rarely ever find these useful. So I kind of just stick with the first one. And then I'll do the same for author, edit cells, cluster edit. And we can start to see something here. So here's an example. This is not really necessary for my purposes. So I'm going to edit directly into the field. Sure. I'm just going to click through. Sure. Merge and recluster. Okay. So this was a pretty small example. If you're working with, I'm only working with about 6,000, or 3,100 rows. So when you start working with larger data sets, that can get, overwhelming, a lot of clicking, but it's super helpful for finding all those errors and typos. The other thing I know is that, especially when you look at nonfiction books, these titles get really long. And if I'm going to be displaying these like kind of like in a bar chart, I know it's really annoying to have these kind of like variable length titles. And for our purposes, we don't really need it like for this analysis. So I am going to shorten these so they'll just display better. And there's a cool way to do this. And this is a whole other workshop that you could probably do. So I'm just not going to spend too much time belaboring this, but I'm going to use what's called regular expression. If you're not familiar with regular expressions, they are kind of like its own, not coding language, but is a standardized set of characters that you can use to find patterns within text. So they're great for searching. They're great for doing something like this. You can use these like in Excel or like Google Sheets as well. But they have their own standardized thing. So you can use regular expressions with inside OpenRefine, and you do that by doing like these slashes and then typing in your pattern. So I know with the colon, I'm going to do a colon space. And this is where my regular expression is going to come in. I'm going to use period and asterisk. And if I have some time, I'm just going to show you this, what this is going to do. Oops. This is a regular expression tool that I use pretty regularly. And you can use it to practice and craft or things. What I love about this one, it explains what is going on. So it's recognizing the character colon. It's recognizing that I have a space. That's the pattern that I'm following. And then the dot is standardized. So it's any character except for new line. And then the asterisk is saying, just find, I don't really care how long it is, just find everything after it. And you can see how I've highlighted here. It is doing exactly what I want to do with this sample. And then, so with the replace expression, as I mentioned, this is an expression. Value is referring to the value of the cell. It's kind of like a variable, and the dot replace is just the GREL, the general refine, is based on JavaScript. And this is kind of how you apply like your functions, your expressions, how you in Excel. So it expects 2 arguments after replace with inside the parentheses. And then if you're curious as well, on the OpenRefine website, underneath documentation, they have a whole user manual that goes over every single expression that you can use and like what you need to do it. And you can see right here, replace requires a string, with this S's stand for, or a regular expression, and then it replaces with a string. And it kind of gives you an example. So you give what you want to search for and what you want to replace with. And you can also use the regular expression to add or change values. So comma to separate it, I'm going to use quote, some quotes with nothing in it to kind of give it. And you can see now I've edited that. So I've now transformed all that data. And I made those titles way shorter. I'm going to do something similar for authors, just to get rid of all this extra kind of text at the end. Because I don't necessarily need that, and it kind of just distracts. So I'm going to do, edit cells, transform. Start off with, I'm going to do a simpler replace, because I know the authors is kind of like comma. This is the pattern that it follows. I'll put this in quotes because it is a string or text, period. And then I'm going to do, again, just empty quotes to replace, and you can start seeing all these authors. This error is just because there's no author listed there. And boom. So the dates, though, are more of a challenge. For the dates, we need to use a regular expression for that, because I don't know the name of every single date or whatever date, and I don't want to find those again. And so I'm going to use this regular expression because this often follows the pattern. So it's comma, space, followed by find a numerical thing, and then same trick, period followed by asterisk to delete everything that follows afterwards. So let me grab that. Edit, transform, place. Oops. So there, and that should clean up the majority of other ones. There probably is a few errors that I'd probably hunt for at this point. So that's pretty much it. This is what I would do to kind of get this project started. And just kind of do some basic cleanup for it to get my data set in order so I can do some analysis with it. So from here, I can click export and I can do just a comma separated value CSV file to get that done. The other thing, the question the variant wanted to do is like analysis like on these like subjects, specifically for like our cookbooks to see what types of cookbooks is often our most popular nonfiction section. And what do you do? So I'm going to do another open. I'm going to choose the file I just exported. And then I'm not really going to change anything. I'm just going to click create project because it's already analysis. So I want the cookbook specifically. So I'm going to go facet down. I'm going to do a text facet on statistical code, and I'm going to go down to the 640s and pull those in. But with the 640s, I know it's going to pull in some things that aren't cookbook. You know, we got an error. This one was wrong. I only want things that say 641 to start with. And then from here, we can do a custom facet. So I'm going to say if the value, so if the call number there contains, and I'm going to give it a string. You can also do a regular expression to search for a pattern if you want to, but this I'm just going to hard code. And what this is going to do is going to return a Boolean. It's going to give you yes, it does, or no, it doesn't. So I'm going to click on my false. I'm going to then delete it again. So I'm going to go all edit rows, remove matching rows. And now I just have just the 641s here. Oops. I'm also going to invert this, and I'm going to delete these ones as well. So now I'm left with 111 rows that are just the 641s. And to do a analysis of the subjects, there's another thing I do. I know there are books that have been placed on hold more than once. So I don't want to overcount those for the subjects, but I also don't want to lose how many times they've been checked out. So another feature, you can add data, you can transform, and you can also add data to your data set based upon data's in here. So I'm going to click, first I'm going to sort by ISBN. And when you sort, it sorts it, but it doesn't actually change what your underlying data is. To make that change permanent, you need to reorder rows permanently. And now I've got them sorted by ISBN, a unique identifier for these books. And I want to get how many times get a count of how many times these appear within the book. So I'm going to click, I'm going to do edit column this time, and I'm going to add a column based on this column. And I'm going to use a feature called facet count, an expression. And this takes two different values as well. The first is value. So I want you just to count the value with inside this column. And I need to give the name of the column that I wanted to count, which is ISBN. So now you can see this is starting to populate. So it's working, and I can click OK. Oops, you also got to do that. So I'm going to do backouts. And we can do sort this A to Z, and we can see, this Magnolia table has been checked out 6 times. So now I'm sorted by ISBN. Now I want to deduplicate everything that is here, and deduplicating is really powerful within OpenRefine, but it is not intuitive at all. This took me a long time to learn out. But basically you want to use a feature within edit cells and it's called blank down. And what blank down does is it finds something that is the exact same below it. And if it is, it removes it. So it's kind of a weird feature, but now I can do a facet on this and I can get a customized facet and I can facet by blank or empty strings, which could be helpful for finding errors or missing data. But in this case, everything that's true, I know is a duplicate. So I can go edit rows, remove matching rows, and now I'm left with everything that isn't a duplicate, and that's false. So now the last thing I want to do is then split these subjects. And thankfully, they're separated by commas. So what I can do now is go into edit cells, and I can just say split multi-valued cells. I wanted to split by comma. And it just kind of like pivoted my data out. And it put every single subject line on a separate line. So I can get an easy count. So I can aggregate these in some other software. But I have all these blank spaces. But that's pretty easy to fix. You can do edit columns. And you can say just fill down. And it will then just populate all that data. So now I can export this. And just to illustrate what we've been kind of talking about, I can also copy out my steps. So I'm going to just copy, I think this is a JSON file. And then, so this, I'm going to choose a data set. So this test data set, something I pulled yesterday. I have not cleaned this at all. I'm going to go to my undo. I'm going to do apply. I'm going to paste all that JSON, perform operations, and boom. I now have just 641s. Everything has been cleaned up. You know, I got my checkout counts, and I've got all my subjects on separate lines. And from there, I can import this into whatever visualization software I wanted to get the top titles. I can, you know, go down statistical code. That, so, oops, that was not a good one. I don't know what's going on. Oh, I think I changed something. All right, I'll fix that. Maybe I'll later. That example. But yes, that is so this is an example project of how to clean data using OpenRefine. Hope it's helpful. I'm going to turn it over to Elliot for a reconciling example.
Thanks, Tyler. That was awesome. I learned several things. I didn't know you could make a new column from the facet count like that. That is super handy. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, and I've got just a few slides here before moving back to OpenRefine. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit and demo the process for reconciling data in OpenRefine, which Tyler mentioned earlier. As Tyler said, the reconciliation is the process of connecting the data in your project to an external source. So OpenRefine takes the data, the values in your data set, and tries to match them to some data outside of your project. And once that matching has been done, you can do things like pulling in additional data from that external data set or making sure that your data matches. And I don't think I probably need to explain to a bunch of catalogers how valuable that can be. You can think of it sort of like authority control, and you get to decide what data sources you're reconciling against, which is awesome. So there's lots of library related data sources that are available for reconciliation, although I've also had a lot of success using kind of non-library data sources as well, which can be really powerful. I've listed some of them on the slide here. There's a lot more data sources that you can reconcile against, but some of the ones that I use a lot are the Getty vocabularies like the Art and Architecture Thesaurus, VOF, the Virtual International Authority File, Homosaurus, Wikidata, ORCID, which is researcher identifiers. And as I said, there's a lot more. There are some kind of technical requirements for what kinds of data sources you can reconcile against and sort of how those data sources have to be configured on the provider side. So there are some limitations. Like you'll notice here that LCSH and other Library of Congress vocabularies aren't listed. As far as I know, there aren't really good reconciliation services for reconciling directly against Library of Congress. But we are going to walk through kind of a workaround for reconciling against LC using VAuth. So the reconciliation process is semi-automated is the term OpenRefine uses, which I think is kind of delightful. So meaning OpenRefine does a lot of the hard work of looking for matches, but it takes you as a human to review them and make sure they're correct. It's not 100% automatic. This often takes several attempts, and that's fine. I think when I first started doing it, I'd get really frustrated that it didn't all magically work the first time, but that's just not how it goes. So the way I often experience is that you'll try a reconciliation, you'll see what terms match, which ones don't, kind of spot check a few that didn't, see like, are they really not in this external data source, or is it just not matching for some reason, kind of make some changes and try again. It's really helpful to know both how your data are formatted that you're looking at, so spending time with the kind of facets and stuff that we've been talking about, getting a sense of your data. And you'll also want to know kind of how the data you're reconciling against is formatted too. This will help you kind of get your data in shape that will reconcile the easiest. So for example, if I'm reconciling against VAuth, I know that the names there will be last name, comma, first name. So that's how I'll structure my data. But if I was reconciling against Wikidata, for example, then I know that the names will be in direct order. So I might want to do some manipulation of my data beforehand. So I often do a kind of first pass of cleaning up my data using a lot of those tools that Tyler just demoed. The clustering is really powerful, editing some of the data in bulk before doing the reconciliation. So I'm going to demonstrate the reconciliation process using the same data I was showing earlier, which is a subset of data from a digital collection. And I'm going to reconcile the location column against Library of Congress name authorities. I know that at my library, we use LCSH and LCNAF for place names. So a lot of those names should be in the Library of Congress, and reconciling the data will help me see which ones are and are authorized LC names and which ones are not, either because they're not in Library of Congress or because the data is incorrect. So as I mentioned, Library of Congress doesn't provide a reconciliation service for its vocabularies, but VAuth, which again is the Virtual International Authority file, does, and LC is included in VAuth, so we can kind of use that as a workaround. It's not perfect, it causes some difficulties, which we'll kind of see, but it's the easiest way I know of to reconcile against Library of Congress. So there's a couple of ways to reconcile against VAuth. The one I like the most is a service called Conciliator, which was created by Jeff Chu as just an amazing service to the library community. There's a link in the resources document that Rebecca sent out earlier this week if you'd like to get some more information and play around with it. You can either download and run the service yourself if you're going to use it often, or there's a hosted public server you can use if you're only doing kind of a relatively small number of cells, which is what we're going to use today. So I'm going to switch back over into OpenRefine. So to start the reconciliation, you go to the column you want to reconcile. As I said, the location column is what I want to work with today. Go to reconcile down here and start reconciling. So when you do that, OpenRefine will show you all the reconciliation services you have available. It comes with a few sort of built in automatically, but it's pretty easy to add new ones. You can see most of these I've added myself. I think the Wikidata one comes built in. To add a new service, you go to add standard service here and just plop in the URL. It's super easy, but I already have this service added. So I'm just going to select that, and we're working with the LC by way of VAuth service here. It takes a couple seconds to load the options, probably more because I'm asking my computer to do a lot of things right now. But it populates the options we have for this service. So on the left here, it will show you some options of what type of entity to match each cell to. Every reconciliation service provides different data types that it can match to, and OpenRefine will try and pick the one that it thinks is most likely. In our case, it picked correctly. We do want to reconcile against geographic name because that's what these are, but we could select something different if we wanted to. You can also select reconcile against no particular type. If, for example, you didn't know what type would be a good match, or if you had multiple things in the column, like for example, if we had personal names, geographic names, and corporate names all in the same column, we could try against reconciling against no particular type. But in this case, I'm going to leave geographic name selected. On the right here, there's some options for providing additional data from other columns to help improve the matching. So for example, if we were reconciling names of people and we had their birth years in a separate column, we could include that to help get better results. But in this case, we're going to leave it blank. In most cases, I don't fiddle with this, but I think you can if you want to get really fine-grained and depending on what kind of data you have. I'm also going to leave this auto match candidates with high confidence selected. And then we just hit start reconciling. So this part of the process can take a while. I'm hoping it'll go quickly today, but we'll see. It depends on how many values you have and how fast the external server responds to requests. Yeah, it's going quick for us today, which is great. This went pretty fast. I have had it take where it takes several hours to run. So I just kind of leave it running in the background while I go get a cup of coffee or respond to emails or do whatever else I have going on that day. So now that the reconciliation is finished, you'll see kind of several new things in our project here. So there's these new facets on the side for the judgment and the best candidate score. And then if you look in the location column underneath each cell, there are options for the reconciliation. And I'm actually going to switch into rows mode and use that same facet by blank that Tyler was showing. So we're just seeing the cells that have a location value. So looking at the values here, you see that El Paso, Texas is now in blue because it has matched, which is great. That's what we wanted. And it's a hyperlink. And if you click it, it now takes us to the Library of Congress authority page for El Paso, Texas, which is exactly what we wanted. Hooray. One thing you'll notice, though, is that the form of the name in our OpenRefine project is El Paso, Texas. And the Library of Congress form is El Paso parentheses. And that's because of that sort of, we're not really reconciling against Library of Congress, we're reconciling against VOF, and whatever algorithm VOF uses, it's selected El Paso comma instead of El Paso parentheses. So that's kind of a weird oddity of the way we're doing this reconciliation. Normally, it would be the same form of the name from the source that you're reconciling against. So you can see under the other values that didn't match automatically. So this one, it said, because we selected that auto match with high confidence, it said, yes, we are confident this is the right El Paso. We're going to just match it automatically. These ones, it wasn't quite so sure. So it's offering us some options. So this top one for Bexar County, which for those of you who are not from Texas, which I know is everyone, is the county that San Antonio is in. So it's saying maybe this is Bexar County, Texas. Maybe it's Sayers in Bexar County, Texas. Maybe it's the Bexar Metropolitan Water District. And the number after it is that confidence score. So it's saying this is the most likely one, but here's some other options just in case. So we know this first option looks correct. And so we want to say like, yes, this is the right match. So you can do that either with the single check mark, which will match just this cell, or the double check mark, which will match every similar cell in our project. So we're going to do that. And you can see now all of these Bexar counties are matched. So if we were doing this for real, this is where I would kind of go through all of our unmatched terms and try to match them. And this location judgment facet is really helpful for that. So I can facet down to just the ones that are not matched, which is this none facet here. And now it's only showing me those. So cool, El Paso County, that's right. We're going to select that. Floresville, cool, check that. And so now we get to some that don't have any recommendations. So this Camp San Saba, I know that that's just sort of a local name that's not going to be in Library of Congress. So that's why there's no option for it. Sometimes you'll see some that don't have a match because they're not in the external data source, but sometimes that means that the term in your project is too different from the external term. So the algorithm couldn't match that. And so maybe that means you need to massage your data a little bit more. And as I was saying, that's where that kind of iteration comes from. As I said, I know that this is a local term. It's not going to be in Library of Congress, but I want to remove it from, I want to say, yes, I know that, remove it from my list of terms that aren't matched. So that's where this create new item comes in. So I'm going to say, create a new item for this, which is basically saying, yes, I know that this doesn't match the external data source. And now we have this new value in our judgment facet for new, which is those ones that we've marked as a new term. Again, so if I was doing this for real, I'd kind of keep going through, and try and match all of these. So that's great. Now let's imagine I've kind of gone through and matched all the terms in this column to Library of Congress, which is neat, but like, then what do I do with that, right? So one thing to know about reconciliation is that you aren't actually editing the data in the cell in OpenRefine. So this first cell here says Bexar County parentheses TEX. But if I go to edit that cell, you'll see it still says Bexar County, comma, TEX, which is what my data had to begin with. So if I was doing this for kind of authority control purposes, I'd want to know what the actual Library of Congress name of each of these places is, right? So I can get that really easily. So what I want to do is create a new column with the reconciled name of each of these cells. So I'm going to do similar to what Tyler was doing before. I'm going to create a new column. So go to edit column, add column based on this column. We're going to call that location LC. And the value for that is cell.recon.match.name. And so that is then going to pull in the name of the reconciled value in the external data source. And voila, now we have this new column. I'll also say these GREL expressions like the ones that Tyler was showing as well. I don't ever remember them. I always have to look them up. I always have to Google them. OpenRefine is really well documented. The documentation is, I think, really helpful. So just because I knew how to type that out from memory for this demonstration does not mean that is how my life usually goes. And I don't think any of us need to kind of memorize those things. That's what documentation is for. So yeah, as you can see now, we have this new column with the name of the cell, or excuse me, of the place in Library of Congress. Another thing you might want to do is to get a column with the Library of Congress identifiers for each of these values, and that's actually even easier to do. So you go back to this column and go to reconcile, add entity identifiers column. We're going to call that location LCID. And voila, now we have this column that has all of the Library of Congress ID numbers for these values, which might be useful if we were, if you were working with MarcEdit and you wanted to export that back into an authority control system, or do something else with it. So that's kind of the quick and dirty introduction to reconciliation in OpenRefine. There's a lot more you can do with it. I've had a lot of success also reconciling against Wikidata, and then you can pull in a lot more. Basically any data that's in Wikidata you can add into your project, which can be really powerful. But I hope you can see kind of how that would be useful for a lot of kind of metadata and cataloging work. And so I think that's it for my presentation. And I believe that now Tyler and I will take some questions if you have any about OpenRefine.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. That was incredibly helpful. I could not write fast enough. So if anybody has any questions, please throw them still in the Q&A. So we'll just wait a few seconds here, give everybody a few minutes. Okay, I'm going to read this one from Lucas in Downers Grove. So is there a way to get a map of all of the changes that you made to specific rows of data, or a list of all of the rows you made edits to? i.e., if I do catalog cleanup in OpenRefine, is there a way to then have a list of items that you could then go and update in the catalog?
That is a great question. And I can kind of attempt to answer what I've done in the past, but Tyler, if you have other more useful ideas, please share them. So if I'm interpreting this right, I think one of the challenges with OpenRefine is you can do a lot there, but then you have to get the data out to then put it back in your system. And sometimes the systems we use don't make that very easy. So one kind of hacky way that I do that is I will kind of I will add another column. So let's say I was cleaning up, author names. So I'd have a column in my OpenRefine project for author, and then I would have a second column maybe called like author cleanup. And that's where I'd actually be making my changes. And then I would be able to compare those two columns and see which ones were the same and which ones were different. And then the ones that were different, I would know, okay, those are the ones I have to go back into my catalog and edit manually if I had to, or then export that data to upload if I could do that. But other than sort of using that operation history, I don't know a great way to kind of have a list of all of the rows that you made edits to. Or adding some other flag, like adding another column again, that's, you use to keep track of that. I'm not sure that was a super satisfactory answer.
You got a thank you for it, so I think you're. Yes, Lucas says thank you. So
I will say that's one of the challenges is, you can do all this amazing stuff in OpenRefine, but then if you can't pull that back into the system where the data came from, for kind of metadata, then it limits the usefulness.
yeah, I'll say I'm not an expert by any means. So if this is wrong, please, Elliot and Tyler, tell me. I'll do the same thing what Elliot was talking about, where I'll make another column, and our system uses a control number for each of our bib records. So then you can then import your data like you would in your catalog normally, and it'll match on that control number. So that's another way. Okay. So we have another question. Have you used OpenRefine to find incorrect diacritics or symbols in bib records? I'm thinking of spell checking of Spanish language words on titles and summaries. And that's from Nancy. Thank you, Nancy.
I've never thought to try to use OpenRefine for that, but now I want to.
I'm not saying this is, I did think I've never done it personally, and I've never, but like, I don't know if you noticed when I was going through like the clustering, there was some words that did have like accent marks or diacritics that it was catching. So it was recognized it was the same title, and then like one of them had the diacritic and one of them didn't. So yeah, you could do it that way, like with the clustering feature, but I feel that potentially it's hit and miss because like it relies on there being one in there that would need a diacritic. Otherwise, yeah, I think you'd have to do some sort of like reconciling, like Elliot showed, that had like some sort of standardized author name, and then bounce that off and compare it. Or if you had some sort of way to find, whether it's I guess like a world languages collection that you would expect there to be diacritics, and then going through it line by line, or using clustering. That's off the top of my head. I've never personally done that for them. Yeah,
the other thought I had is, often when kind of diacritics get mangled, you end up with the sort of encoding showing as like ampersand something something, all those weird characters. So you could maybe try also filtering for like, is there an ampersand in this data, which might indicate kind of a diacritic screw up. But I definitely want to explore this more. Thanks, Nancy.
So Elliot, the idea of memorizing all your different GREL expressions like that, there is a cool way that I just discovered the other day. You can do history, and so you can find everything you've ever done, basically from the last all our projects. It's not even within the project you just did, but if you did a previous project, you can go to history and you can reuse Grail things. I think you can also star like favorite ones. I've never done that before, obviously.
My eyes just lit up at the starred one.
So that way you don't have to memorize things. You don't really even need to look them up. It'll just be within your history within OpenRefine too.
That's amazing. Okay, we have another one. So it says you showed us parsing CSV data, but what are some of the other options? Looking at MARC files, of course.
I'll defer to, I've never worked with MARC files, but you can see what you can import though. So you can do like XML files. I think that is an import option, but I don't know if it's set up for MARC.
Yeah, I import XML pretty regularly into OpenRefine, and it's great. It makes it really easy to kind of parse XML into columns, which is such a pain to do in Excel. And again, honestly, that's something I do in OpenRefine pretty regularly. Is I will import XML into OpenRefine and then just immediately export it to use it in Excel if I need to do something Excel-ish. Kind of going back to what Tyler was saying, I think there's things that OpenRefine is best at, and there's things that Excel is best at, and it's kind of which tool do I know how to use to do the thing I want to do. I will say that MARC XML, OpenRefine isn't great at directly interpreting MARC XML because of the way MARC XML is formatted. You get each field basically becomes a row, which might be what you need, but often isn't what I need. So often what I will do is use MarcEdit to transform my MARC data into CSV to export the fields that I'm interested in looking at, and then plop that into OpenRefine. So kind of chaining the two tools together. Mike, I don't know if you had thoughts about that as well.
Yeah, I would have just said, yeah, MarcEdit can probably port your MARC data into another format like XML or in Excel. It's a little clunky. I've never used OpenRefine, so I couldn't say how well it would work with that. But yeah, that seems like what you'd want to do is just convert it with MarcEdit and then use OpenRefine.
Never done it before, but yeah, I don't know if everybody could see the link I put in the chat, but it does look like MARC is supported by OpenRefine. I've never done it before though. So
yeah, I don't know if I've ever tried like a MARC file in a flavor other than MARC XML, like mnemonic MARC or something like that. Might go experiment this afternoon.
Nancy, what you said, any tips, or what are you referring to specifically about importing MARC files or just in general?
Nancy had her question before that, sorry, it got moved. She says, we'll be migrating to CCS Polaris in September, and she'd love to explore using OpenRefine to clean up data before and after going live. And any tips was the follow-up to that. Or templates. Yeah, templates would be awesome.
Well, first, good luck with the migration. I know that's always a humongous ordeal. I think the way I would think about approaching using OpenRefine as part of that is maybe kind of like targeting specific things you want to work on. MarcEdit can handle a lot of data. I wouldn't try and export an entire bibliographic database into it. I think that might tax even OpenRefine. So I would maybe think about, if there's particular areas that you wanted to clean up, a particular group of records that you knew had some kind of issue, some kind of, or, that you wanted to figure out, like, how are we using this particular field? Do we need to, what are we going to need to do with that in the new system? Maybe trying and exporting exporting those records in kind of groups from your existing system, putting them in OpenRefine, and using some of those kind of exploration tools to help guide your decisions as you're migrating. That's one thing I might think about trying to do.
And then this might be kind of for you, Tyler, but I'm sure Elliot does it too. But what data once you have all your cleaned up data, what data visualization software and programs do you use?
Let me share my screen again. So for work, or the majority of projects, especially for internal stuff, I use Looker Studio. It's a Google product, is completely free. It connects to Google Sheets really easily, which is primarily why I use it, because my library is a Google Enterprise, but you can use it for free with any sort of like Google account as well. And you can upload CSV files. And then, so yeah, this is what I was trying to show earlier, and you can do, you can have different, filters and whatnot. And on the underside of it, you just kind of like, select a chart that you want, and then you just kind of connect the data. So here I'm just counting, I'm doing it by title. Oh, oops, looks like these got flipped. So, and you can then customize color and, do what you got to do. So it is not the most, when it comes to the data visualization, it's not the best. I find it kind of limiting in some ways, especially if you want to do like helpful tooltips, kind of like with these hovering things. There's no way to really customize those. Like you get what you get, as opposed to things that. The other thing I use is like Tableau. Tableau is not free, but there is a Tableau public, which is free, which essentially just means that you can download the program Tableau, but you can't save projects locally on your machine. Anytime you want to save something, you basically have to upload it to Tableau public, which is what this is right here. And it just like, you can hide things, but it is still being hosted externally. So you can't, use it with caution. You don't want to expose any sort of person identify information through it. So you got to kind of de-anonymize everything, just make sure it's not things like that. But it's a really great product, especially for doing more complicated charts, like this, where you can kind of like hover over and give things if you want to make it interactive. But yeah, it's usually something I'm going to, I'd only use for like public facing things like that. As you can see, like these tooltips are a lot more robust and you can give a lot more information about what it's doing. So those are two primary things that I use. I know some libraries use like Microsoft, BI, is kind of another paid for product, but like I said, so if you're looking to get started, I'd highly recommend Looker Studio, just for doing simple stuff, and you can lock that down pretty easily. And there's a lot of documentation out there for both. So basically, if you've thought of something someone else has probably already asked it on Reddit.
Well, thank you guys, and thank you for all the questions, everybody. I think if we're all ready, oh, just kidding. All right, we'll do this last one, and then I desperately need a break. So, so John G from Indian Trails says, for my grade, oh, it's a suggestion. Thank you. This is helpful. He says, I suggest maintaining a test database throughout the process and/or work on call number structure for any television or movie series involving volume numbers and/or magazine call numbers and/or travel books and/or standing order materials. So yes, those are all solid suggestions. Thank you, John. All right, well, if we're ready for a break, Joy, can we stop recording for 10-ish minutes, and then we'll jump into MarcEdit with Mike. Thank you, Joy. Mike, you're still muted.
Sorry about that. Okay, so so my introduction to MarcEdit was when I was working at a different library that was used Cersei Dynamic Symphony, and I wanted to be able to make large-scale edits, you know, to multiple records at once. And our global edit function was locked down by our IT department, so I had to learn to export the records, edit them in MarcEdit, and then reload them as a workaround. And when you start using a tool, a lot of other uses for it begin to suggest themselves. So I hope this demonstration will give you some ideas for your own projects. So there's my official title slide, and the unofficial one with the little wizard, because MarcEdit is magical, in my opinion. So I understand that there was an introduction to MarcEdit in a previous Laconia workshop, so I'm only going to so I'm going to skip the basics. You know, there are links in the handout that to Terry Reese's website where you can download MarcEdit for Windows and Mac, and for Windows or Mac, and lots of resources that also cover the basics and more advanced tasks. So I'm really going to spend most of the time on just a few different ways you can use MarcEdit. So I'm going to talk a little bit about analyzing and customizing a batch of new bibliographic records that are, you know, that you might want to add to your collection. Then I'm going to look at a project for editing some older exported records from your catalog, you know, for doing some cleanup and updating. And then I'm also going to talk briefly about how you can use MarcEdit to help with authority work. So as you know, MarcEdit is not a single tool, it's a whole suite of tools. And I'm just pointing out the ones that we're going to touch on during this presentation. We're mostly be using MarcEditor. I'll probably mention more than actually use the tools for translating Excel and Marc back and forth. Well, actually, I'll show a little bit about exporting a tab delimited file just of a selected part of the Marc record. We're going to use the merge tool, which is really cool, and we're not going to get too deep into it, but I'm also going to use the MarcNext program, which itself is several different programs, and I've only used one of them to, you know, very much, so we'll look at that. Basically, I don't think MarcEdit something is something you want to use for analysis. If you can use OpenRefine based on everything I just saw, but it does have some kind of basic capabilities there. But the really useful bits are for editing and changing the Marc in various ways, which we'll be demonstrating. I have a couple of situations where you might use MarcEdit, whether it's with incoming records from vendors or batches of records from a bibliographic utility. And then also sometimes, you know, you might use MarcEdit if the kinds of changes you want to make aren't easily done within your ILS, or if you want to augment some of your data with, or your bib records with data from spreadsheets or other sets of records. So again, this is, so when you're working with bib records in MarcEdit, the analysis and quality control is, as I said, is pretty limited. You can run reports in MarcEditor to see if your records are complete, if their structure is valid, if there's errors in the Marc, what types of materials are present, things like that. The real strength, though, I think, is going to be in a lot of these Marc edits and enhancements. And I just have this slide up for reference because it's in the handouts. And I'm going to switch over to the program now. See how well that works with sharing. Okay, so all right, there's my splash screen. So I'm going to use MarcEditor to open up the first test file that I shared, which might take a second. Okay, so this is a set of 26 bibliographic records that have they've been translated into the MARC mnemonic format, which is sort of like the text editing format for these MARC records. You can see that the tags are preceded with the equal sign, and all the rest of the data is there. So if I wanted to decide if I want to even use these records, I could run a report up here just to make sure that the records look complete. Like, do they all have, titles and authors and things like that? And so one thing MarcEdit will do is this field count, which will tell you which fields are present and how many records are present in. They get pretty basic compared to what you can do with OpenRefine, but still useful. There's also a MARC validator program, which I'm not going to run right now, but you can both check your records against MARC rules files to make sure that, for example, there's not repeated subfields. I doctored this first set of records for if you want to work on it on your own after this workshop. There are a bunch of little errors. Some of them might be more immediately obvious, like a repeated 042 field, and then some of them are a little bit more subtle, like this repeated subfield A. But the rules, the MARC validator will catch those sorts of things. The report that I think is probably the most useful, though, which does more than just report, it actually can make some corrections, is validate headings. So, the validate headings basically is a bit like the reconcile function that Elliot was demonstrating. Of course, it only works within MARC records, and it's only going to work. It's only going to check the headings, the access points, against LC authorities. So this is these are your options here. You can just look at name access points, 1XX and 7XX. You could also look at subject headings. There's an option to only look at subfield A in the subject headings. And that's there because, as you're probably aware, if you're a cataloger, a lot of subject headings don't have an LC authority for a heading with multiple subdivisions in it, right? So we have women scientists subdivided by fiction here in this MARC record. There might not be an authority record for that. There's just an authority record for the subfield A. I tend not to use it checked, though, because I understand that the 650s, that the topical headings are not going to validate a lot of the time, but I like to use the automatically correct variance function, and that gets really wonky if you have that checked with 6XX, mainly because of name and corporate body and other kinds of headings that are established with subdivisions of whether it's qualifiers or whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and run this right now. It shouldn't take too long. I checked right before the session whether the services that it accesses are available. And it looks like they are. So yeah, it's going a little bit slow, but you can see down here at the bottom of the screen that it's processing the records. Now what it's doing is it's just going to take all of the 1XX fields, 7XX fields, and 6XX fields and see if they match something in the LC authorities. If they do, it will report it as authorized. If they don't, it'll report it as invalid. And if the heading matches a variant that's in an authority record, it will automatically flip it to the authorized form. Now, so unlike the reconciliation process, this is totally automated. It's not going to ask if there's, close cases or near matches. It's only going to do the flip if there's a perfect match. But at the end of this, there will be a little report showing us which headings were matches and which ones weren't. So we could go back and manually reconcile some of it. So in this case, we get our validation results, popped up here on the screen. I hope you see that. So I guess one caveat is that the total records it reports is for some reason always wrong. It seems to count extra, maybe spaces in between or after records in this MRK file, as think that there are additional records, but the number of records with invalid headings and everything else, all these other counts are always fine. So it says that it found 23 of the name headings and 4 of the added name headings and 63 of the subjects. That's pretty good. It only found 1 variant. And then if we continue scrolling down, it'll show us the headings that it didn't find that's reporting is not valid. And as you can see, television cooking shows. Yeah, I'm not surprised that there's not an authority record that exactly matches that whole string. But the interesting thing is going to be where it found variants, because it'll show you the term that they found in the record, the LC preferred term, and it'll also provide a URL for that authority. Now, if I had clicked another box, which I kind of meant to do, under validate headings, we could have embedded that that URL, like, or URI, I guess it would be in a subfield 0, in the record when it finds a match. But what works even, we'll do that and more. I go back to MarcEdit. Where's my splash screen? In MarcNext, you can actually have it insert those link identifiers, not just for the names and subject access points, but also for other controlled vocabularies in the record. And so what you would do is you would select the Marc file that you're working with. And in this case, I already ran this outside of the program. I mean, I'm outside of the workshop, so we don't have to wait for it to run. And so this test file 1.5 that I shared has had validate headings run, and then this link identifier program run. And now you can see the names have both a subfield 0 for the LC authority and a subfield 1 for the IAF object. And it's not just for the names and subjects, it's also appearing in other controlled vocabularies like the 33X fields. So for the RDA content, carrier, and media types, and also for the genre headings. So if your library uses linked data, that would certainly be a big benefit. Something you can add and for free with MarcEdit. Another option that I didn't check under validate headings was to download LC authorities. So another thing it can do is when it finds a match, it doesn't just report it as a match. It will create a separate file of authority records for every match that it made. I ran that on a different file, and we'll look at that in a little bit later. When we're working with authority records. So anyway, so these are 26 books that we're going to lease from Baker and Taylor, and they come from Baker and Taylor with lots of customizations. But what we didn't ask them to do was put in a call number, a local call number. So I'm kind of cooking up this example. When I worked at a public library, we would add a call number that was an 099 field with the word fiction, and then the first 5 letters of the author's name. So one thing you can do in MarcEdit is automatically create fields like that. But in this case, not all of these are fiction. We actually have a couple of nonfiction books in this set. I think that one, Wake Up with Purpose, is one of them. Yeah, so this is a biography. We don't want to have a fiction call number there. So although MarcEdit's ability to filter things is pretty limited, it is able to select subsets of records with the select records for edit option here. So I want to find all of the fiction bib records in this set. And there's a couple of ways we could do it. We could look for fiction in the subject headings, but I think a more certain way is to look at the fixed fields in the 008 of the MARC record, because as a cataloger, and I assume a lot of your catalogers will know that there is a fixed field in the MARC record. The 33rd position will be a 1, an F, or an S for different kinds of fiction. So a lot of libraries will just follow the Library of Congress's convention of just having a 1 for fiction, 0 for nonfiction. Some are more specific, will have an F for novels and an S for short stories. So if I wanted to find that in the 008 field and select records based on that, we're going to have to use a regular expression, which I'm glad Tyler and Elliot talked about a little bit already, so I don't have to go into too much detail as to what those are, but it's a way to find a pattern. So the pattern we're looking for here is the 33rd. So I'll hit import. I chose 008 as my display field. I should probably explain that. So for all of these records, it's showing that that's the fixed fields, right? Fixed field values. So I want to look for the 33rd character. In this case, I can kind of tell it's that 1 there. But that's a pattern I'm looking for. So a regular expression is really the best way to find it. So I'm going to say we can have anything, that period, have 32 instances of anything. And then in the 33rd position, we want either a 1, an S, or an F. So I put that in square brackets, and it's telling the regular expression. That's a regular expression for any of those 3 characters. And in MarcEdit, for most of the searching and finding and replacing functions, you can choose to use regular expressions. You don't need to use the slashes before and after it, as you do in a lot of programs like we demonstrated in OpenRefine. We can just check that box instead. So I've selected my display field, imported the file, and now when I hit this search button, it's going to select. Okay, it selected 22 records that match my criteria. So I'll hit OK, and then I'll hit export selected, and it's going to export all of the ones with the check, with the boxes checked, into another MARC editor window. And if you can see at the top here, this is just like a temp file. Might bring my mouse up there and pulling down the zoom menu, but you can probably see it on your screen. So now I can work with these records, and when I go back under the file menu and hit save, it'll reintegrate them into that first set of records. And so the edits I do will only affect these fiction records. And I wanted to build a new field, which is one of the tools. And basically, you can use a sort of take a pattern and tell MarcEdit what we want these fields to look like. So I want it to be an 009. So start with equals 009. I'm sorry, 099, 2 spaces, 2 blank indicators. And I want it to start with the word fiction, have a space, and then the pattern. Now this is not necessarily a regular expression. The patterns for build new fields, Terry Reese has documented on his website, but they're, and I'm not a programmer. This might be something that's recognizable to programmers, but I'm just kind of following it by rote. But I know I want the 100 field, subfield A, which is going to be the last name of the authors, and I don't want the whole name there, or the whole last name, comma, first name, etc. I want just the first 5 letters. So in this case, it's substring 0, 5. That's the syntax. And when I hit process, it should, 22 fields were added to the data file. So I'll cancel to close that. So So there, with the build new field, we can add our own local call numbers using a pattern, taking data from other parts of the record. So I wanted to make sure that these all look right. We don't have, the filtering. Again, we don't really have like really cool filtering options that OpenRefine has. But if you do a find all, naming a given tag, it will give you a result list with all of those tags and all the different records. And I'll notice that, oh, some of the names had less than 5 characters. So I could go back with the edit field tool and delete the commas. But I won't do that for right now. So there, so I've selected all of the fiction, added a call number, and if I go in and hit save, it will put them back into the same I guess my original test file. I'll put them back into 1.5. So now this one should have those. Yeah, so it has my 099s and it has my identifiers added. So that is one way of improving data, transforming data before you add it into your catalog. So all those steps are documented on this slide. So a more maybe exciting thing you can do is taking your existing records from your catalog and edit them in MarcEdit. Now, of course, you want to export them from your ILS, and every ILS is different how that works. But once you've so in my case, I have a set of records. I decided to look at the fiction in my catalog, or not actually, well, not fiction, but just all records in my catalog that didn't have subject headings. And that's usually going to be fiction. We happen to have at the University of Akron a decent sized collection of children's books for our education majors to use, and many of them were added years and years ago, before the 80s, when it became more common to add subject headings to fiction. So I decided, so I ran a search, and that is, so a sample of those are going to be in your test file number 2. I think I just took like 20 or 30, maybe 40 records with no subject headings, and exported them. And you can see they're pretty bare bones. Some of them are children's poems, some of them are other things. So what I would like to do is find a more updated record for my bibliographic utility. We use OCLC. You can batch search in other utilities too, Sky River, whatever you happen to use. So in order to do that, I want to pull out the control numbers that are in the 001 field. So those are the OCLC numbers. And I guess I should mention, since we're a Sierra, an innovative interfaces library, all of our records have the prefixes stripped out of the control number. When I was in CERC Dynex, we would have the OCM, OCN, whatever, in front of the control number. But for our purposes here, that's fine. So what I'm going to do is use export tab delimited to open up that folder there. I'm going to open up that export file of the records with no subject headings, and tell it to just save the text file as OCLC text, which I actually did right before this, so we'll leave it in there. So if all I want is one field, I can tell it to the field and subfield that I want. 001 doesn't have any subfields, so I can just add 001 and nothing else, and export, and that'll create that text file for me that has all of those OCLC numbers. Okay, and it includes the first tag, the 001. So I could delete all those quotation marks, with a quick find and replace, go into OCLC, and run a batch search, and end up with the OCLC iterations of those same children's books that we were just looking at. So that's your test file 3. And as you can see, these are much more robust records. They have tons of subject headings, but maybe some that we wouldn't want, but certainly the ones we do want. It has contents notes, lots of other things. But our records locally are going to have, the call numbers we assigned. They're going to have possibly some local notes, and things that we wouldn't want to lose. And importantly, our local records have some 9XX fields that identify which record they are in Sierra. We have like our record number, that 907 field, because if I just load I wouldn't want to just load the OCLC records as they are. But what I can do is use MarcEdit to pick and choose which parts of the records I want to combine and then load them back in. So assuming I want to maintain the records I already had and just add, say, the subject headings and contents notes from these other records. I'm just going to start closing up all of those MarcEditor windows to a little bit tidier. I would use the merge records tool. So with this, you can choose 2 sets of records. And in our case, our source is going to be the records we want to mostly keep, which are those exported records. And then our merge file is going to be the records that have some data we want to add, which is going to be those OCLC records. And I'll give it some other name to save them as well. I mean, I've already run this on my own, but that 3.5 merged is what it should look like. I'll tell it, go ahead and replace it. So how's it going to know which records match which? I can tell it, what fields to use, to look at. I could actually set up a whole, range of match points. But for now, we'll just use the 001, which is, the control number. These are all OCLC records. So in this case, it's going to look at the 001 and the 091. I'm sorry, the 019, the past control numbers to determine if there's a match. So then I'll hit next, and I'll tell it that I want to move over all of the subject fields and genre fields. So that's going to be 6XX. And then I also want to merge over the contents notes of 505. And I want it to not just add the first of any of these it sees, but all of them. So I'm going to check the merge unique items box. Otherwise, it would just take the first subject heading and the first contents note from each record and merge it over. And you can also set the confidence value for matching. I've generally left it at 0.7. And especially when you only have one match point, like the 001, you can be pretty confident if there's a match or not. If we had a more complicated set of matching criteria, like titles and things like that, that could vary a little bit, I might reduce the confidence level. But anyway, we'll just go to next. And it says the files have been merged, and I can click on the Edit Records button to open it up again in MarcEditor. And I did something wrong. So okay, the 505 moved over, maybe the 6, you can use 6XX in some context in MarcEdit to mean all 600 fields. Probably when I ran it for real in your 3.5, I actually told it to do 600, 610, 611, etc. So this is what I expected to see. That's your test file 3.5. So if you actually add in all of it, actually enumerate the 6XX fields and not just say 6XX. So yeah, so this is a little bit better. I feel better about loading these in, but our OPAC actually uses some of the RDA fields, and we do think that our users find it more intuitive to see the abbreviations spelled out and things like that. And MarcEdit has a tool really just for that, called the RDA helper. And what it will do is take your bibliographic records and add things to them to bring them closer to RDA. It'll even change the 040 to say that it was cataloged in RDA, but I don't usually click that because it's not really being reviewed by a cataloger. This is all automated processes, but it can just look at the fixed fields and other things about the record to figure out what the 3.3x fields should look like, fight AV. You could also do some of the 3.4x fields. And nicely, it can change the imprint to the 264 from a 260. And perhaps the most powerful thing, it can expand abbreviations. Now I could tell it which fields, which abbreviations I want to change and what they should be. In that setting under edit list, and then the edit fields, I can tell it what fields to work on. In this case, we're just doing 245 subfield C, the imprint, the extent, and the notes. But you could, depending on your situation, you might add or subtract to those fields. But when I run the RDA helper, and it's a very fast process, all 50 of these records have been updated, and now the 300 is fully unabbreviated, as is the 245. It has the 3XX fields added, and I could go ahead and run validate headings on this if I wanted to. In this case, I actually, again, ran it offline, so I wasn't sure how long it would take, especially since this is more records this time. So test file 4 is actually the having run download authority records on test file 3.5. These are all the authority records that I downloaded. So I could load those in now that I have them. I think I must have run it just with names checked, the 1XX, 7XX, and but you could do it with subjects too. So it's kind of a nice way to automate some of your authority control, because at the University of Akron we don't have any of our authority work outsourced. We don't have a backstage or somebody like that finding authority records for us. This is a much quicker way to grab a batch of records, batch of authority records. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was how you could use MarcEdit to do a little bit more authority work beyond just exporting catalog records and running validate headings. I'll go back to my slides for that. So again, we have an older catalog. We've been these records have been coming over. It's been through several migrations, but without any outsourced authority work. So sometimes we'll have records with older forms of headings that never got updated. So like this Dylan Meyer, both we're seeing there's Dylan S with the full name in the qualifier, and there's the death date added or not. So the LC authority record in this next slide, this is from the OCLC display, you can see it, the authorized form, is that one that we had just in like 1 or 2 records. And there is a variant listed of the full name without the initial. But again, it has all of the years. So in our catalog, in automated authority processing, if I added this authority record, it's only going to look for the variants that are already in the record, these 400s, and flip them to the 100. So what I'd like to do is create extra variants that have open dates, to kind of account for the fact that the closed dates are usually where things are failing to match. So again, for reference, I'll kind of show you, you have this slide to see how we're going to do it, but I will open up that authority record file again. So, whoops, that's the bib records. Okay, so MarcEdit is really mainly intended for working with bibliographic records. So a lot of the reports and things aren't going to work quite as we'd expect them. Like the Marc validator is only going to validate for bib_marc, not authority marc. But the edit fields works exactly as the same way. So if I wanted to add some fields, or in this case, copy some fields, create some additional variants that are going to match the access points, but with open dates, I can do that with this copy field function. I'm going to tell it, okay, so we're going to take as our source the main entry, the 100. And again, this is going to be something we can only do with a pattern because I don't know what years are going to be appearing. They're going to be open or closed. I just wanted to find open dates. And so what I'm going to do is have it look for the subfield D. I'm putting that / to tell it that the $sign is not a regular expression symbol. It's just a literal $sign. And then a D, so subfield D. And then I'm going to look for some numbers. So in this case, I use a / to tell it it's not a literal D, it's a number, a D. We want to find any 4 instances followed by four numbers followed by a dash. That's going to be set 1. And then the next set is going to be 4 more numbers. So we're telling it to look for a set of dates that are closed. And I'm going to do some replacement, but I don't want to lose any qualifiers that appear after that. So I'm going to do another set, which is just anything at all, that period star that Tyler used earlier. So what I'm going to tell it to do is replace this. It's going to look in these 100 fields for these closed dates followed by whatever, and replace it with the same field followed by set 1, that open date with the dash, and then set 3, that anything that followed the second date. And I'm going to throw in a subfield 5 just as a cataloger's note that this is an old form or an an old form of the name that we don't want displayed. And and when I run copy, it should take all of these 100s and create an instance with a 400 that just has an open date, no second number. If I'm not, in almost everything now in MarcEdit, when you're doing a major, a task or replacement, you have an option to preview what's going to happen, which is great when you're using regular expressions because they are very complicated and it's easy to make, a minor mistake. I'm pretty confident that I got that one right. So what I did, you can see here, we have Bargian Eleanor, 1881 to 1865. It added this, the same name with the open date. So what will that do for me if I have a record with that variant? When I add the authority record to my catalog, it'll flip it. Now, I might also want to create variants of variants, because as we saw with that first name we were looking at, the Dylan Meyer, there was a variant that would have actually been helpful in our catalog. It would have flipped this guy. So going back here, I'm going to tell it to also take 400s and look for the same pattern, the close date, and create an extra variant with an open date. And do that there. So also affected 7 records. So if I kind of scroll through now and look around, we can see that, yeah, it happened to Patricia Beatty here. Now, actually, this would be an example where it wasn't really necessary or occasionally you'll find authority records where they have the open date already added. But I'm pretty sure that, let's see more, that Fargene, I'm sorry, whatever his name is. Dylan Meyer was in here somewhere too. I'll just find, if I can find Meyer. Well, maybe I didn't have him in here. Okay, well, but for someone like Dylan Meyer, that would have also created that second variant point. And this is maybe a more extreme case with Catherine Marshall. We have some variants with closed dates, and now we have all those variants are also copied as open dates. Now, I might want to go back later and reload these authorities without all of these added variants, because these variants are going to appear in the public display in my catalog, and that's going to be a mess. But just for forcing my automated authority processing to do something with them, it's really worth doing. Let's go back to the slideshow. Okay, so now you can, well, I guess the last thing I should mention is similar to OpenRefine, you can take tasks, like a set of operations like that, and save them so that you don't have to run, all these complicated edits on your own. So I think I have the authority cleanup that we just did, I have saved as a task, and you can take a look at it in my task list. It looks a little differently, but it's just telling me what the operation is and what all those different fields I had checked for. So I can always run this at any time. And sometimes it can get pretty complicated. Probably the worst case scenario was the early books online collection from Gale, because if you're familiar with that, it was a collection of bib records for digitized scans of like pre 19th century books, or maybe 19th, pre 20th century. I'm not sure. Yeah, the cutoff might have been around 1800. But anyway, these are early books, and to create, they offered bib records for them, which were basically copied from LC's catalog back in the the early 90s or something like that. So these are all pre-RDA, and some of them are pre-AACR2, because these are such ancient books. They were cataloged by the Library of Congress maybe in the early 20th century before AACR2. So there are all kinds of pre-RDA access points that I wanted to fix, and I ended up wanting to you want to expand some of the abbreviations, like cent to century. You want to change circa to approximately. You want to change flourished, the FL period to active. So I ended up with a massive list of edits that I could use. So these task lists make a lot of these cleanup projects a lot easier. But it looks like I'm just about at the end of my time, so I'll stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Laconie.
Mike, we had one question from Nancy while you were doing your example of merging records to add 650s, and she asked about the 70% confidence. So does that deal with the fact that your OCLC numbers in your first file are stripped on the first characters? Is that what's causing that?
Well, in this case, no, because I had when I had actually stripped the OCN, OCM, etc. from the OCLC number records too before running it. So I wasn't sure if it would affect things. I think MarcEdit, Terry Reese is aware of that issue, that some systems strip out those characters. I think the 70% confidence is more for when you're using other match points like titles and authors and publication dates, because sometimes that there'll be, the title might be more complete in one record than the other. Something like that, or may or may not have a subtitle, but it really should be you want the two records to match.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just give them a few minutes here. If anybody else wants to throw some more questions in the Q&A.
I should also mention, if you're thinking about using MarcEdit, there's a discussion list, MarcEdit L, that is very helpful. People are more than happy to create regular expressions for you. If you say, oh, I want to do this, but I don't know how to do it, there's probably some expert there who can figure it out for you. And there's also, even within MarcEditor, there's the regular expression store is under the tools, and people have uploaded their own tasks and regular expressions so that it's searchable. So if you're looking for a regular expression to do something, often you can find it there too. Because the syntax for regular expressions, I think, as Tyler mentioned, is mostly the same everywhere, but there are like different flavors of how it works. So there are a few things, whether it's that are different in different programs. So I think MarcEdit uses the .NET version of regular expressions.
I'm curious, Mike, and
Yeah.
Elliot too, if you guys have ever, I tried just recently using ChatGPT or one of those similar services to generate. I gave it a try and it was okay at it. So I wondered if you guys had a chance to give that a try for making regular expressions.
I did actually try that. And I can't remember what I was asking it to do, but it came up with something that was, that was fine. I mean, and I feel like that might have been one of the initial, like uses for, when they were testing it out, that they wanted to see if they could generate code that way.
I have not tried it. I am behind the curve on playing around with ChatGPT.
Oh, it's terrible. I mean, it's awful. You should go on ChatGPT and ask it for your biography, and it'll say, oh, I don't know who that is. Then you'll have to feed it like, okay, who is my name, and then say where you work or something like that. It'll just make up something awesome, It turned out I'm a professor of psychology at the University of Akron. Yeah, according to ChatGPT.
I will say I was playing around a little bit during the break earlier with importing MARC records into OpenRefine. And I tried both the .mrc and .mrk formats that MarcEdit uses, and both of them, you can load them into OpenRefine as a project, but it's the same problem I've had before, where so each field is its own row, which again is useful for some things, but not if you're trying to like think about MARC records as a whole, I think.
Yeah, and maybe MarcEdit is kind of really made just for working with MARC records. So, it's like a Swiss Army knife versus having a saw and a corkscrew and a knife.
Okay, well, it looks like we don't have any more questions. So I will turn it back over to Joy and Rebecca, and I will just say thank you to Mike and Elliot and Tyler for the lovely presentations. Yeah. Thank you everybody for joining us.
Go ahead. Hi, this is Rebecca Bartlett. Just wanted to let everyone know if you are interested in joining our planning committee. It's Rebecca@LaGrangeLibrary.org. I'll put my name here in the chat. Our next program is Book and AV Repair and Processing on November 3rd, 2023 in person. That's our first in-person program in many years at Tinley Park.